Is there anyone in your life that you absolutely and totally trust? Knowing you won't be judged, you won't be criticized, the person's attitude will not change in any way, no defenses, total transparency. You can be completely vulnerable, as if you trust yourself. Is there anyone like that in your life? Of course, the follow-up question is, do we even trust ourselves that way? Many people will say, I don't really know if I trust myself. Yes, sometimes I do, but sometimes if something seduces me or I'm distracted, who knows how I'll behave? I don't really always trust my own judgment calls. Some people overtrust themselves to the point of arrogance, which doesn't mean they actually trust themselves. They're just putting that on. So this word trust goes back to the earliest stages of our genesis, of our very conception, our birth. And it affects every decision we make, especially important decisions, emotional ones. Because if you do trust, you let go, you allow yourself to interact, you're more present. When you don't trust, you put up your walls, your armor, your defense mechanisms. So it definitely impacts relationships, marriage, family, children, your spouse. Anyone that comes too close for comfort, trust will immediately come into play, whether you trust that person or you don't trust that person. And if there's a lot of distrust in our lives, due to the fact, let's say we grew up in a home that was unpredictable, that was volatile, upheavals, crisis, when you don't know when the person that's supposed to love you will show up, or will show love, or actually do the opposite. All that shakes us up and we don't allow ourselves to trust. When a child knows that their parents, where their parents are, and they're putting them to bed at a certain time and feed them breakfast and lunch and dinner, that type of consistent routine creates security, which creates trust. Take that away, and we start reacting in very different ways. We're very careful. I remember once sitting with someone who grew up in a very traumatic home, dysfunctional home. And I remember I reached out to pick up a napkin or something on the table, and this woman just recoiled in fear. I had no idea why, and I said, what happened? I thought you were going to slap me. I said, why would I slap you? And of course, it's because in her life, in her childhood, she never knew when she was going to get the next slap. And sometimes a hand reaching out to her, outstretched hand, could be giving her food as a child, or a slap. And when it's unpredictable, you begin to not trust your own instincts. Especially when you're silenced in the face of abuse. You don't even trust your own conscience, your own sense of justice. You're told, no, it never happened. You were never hurt. Don't cry. Silence. What does that do? You can't even trust your own natural instinct. A person is hurt, they cry out. And then you're told, don't cry, nothing happened. When this happens to children, it plays around, it completely messes up and screws up their whole wiring. So trust is a very, very much bigger word than we think. Now, of course, from a philosophical point of view, you can argue, how can you trust anybody? Everybody is driven by self-interest. Everybody has their own agenda. Some people are obviously overtly more selfish or narcissistic. But everybody's got an agenda and strings attached. So can you really trust somebody entirely? We would like to believe that our parents are the people we can trust absolutely because they love us. And they love us even in the name of self-interest. We're an extension of our parents. But we see parents hurt their children all the time and actually undermine trust. So who can you trust when human beings are all fickle, mortal, unpredictable? It's a great gift to find someone that you can know in an unwavering way that no matter what happens, that person is there for you, unconditionally. That's called unconditional love, which creates unconditional trust, unconditional security. So that's lays the ground, somewhat of a background and context to something that I find always fascinating. The US currency is exclusive in the fact that it has these words etched on every coin and every piece of currency, every dollar bill, every denomination of our money. Money. In God we trust. Yes, it goes back when it was formally passed as law in the 50s, 1956. It goes back to the Civil War. There's discussions exactly where it's rooted. There are many who've challenged it and say it goes against the principle of church, of the division of church and state, separation of church and state. But when you go back to the Declaration of Independence, you may not have those words, in God we trust, but we do have the words that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights, invoking the word Creator. And these were written by deists, and it's never been revoked due to the separation of church and state, because it was seen and understood. And I've asked this question to many constitutional scholars and law experts. Why is it not a contradiction to the idea of establishing religion? Because it was seen as a universal statement of absolutely guaranteeing the rights. If it would say all men are born equal, or all men are equal, you would take out the word Creator, then you could always say, you know what, who decided that? If humans decided that, they can also change their mind, or they can say the majority are equal and the minority are not that equal. And we've seen that all the time. We've seen it in Nazi Germany in most obscene and barbaric ways, or more subtle ways in other times in history. Once you say Creator, none of us are the Creator. You're actually establishing an unchangeable and unwavering foundation that nobody can change, because none of us are the Creator. I've never seen anyone actually make that statement, but to me that makes total sense. So in God we trust, basically the same idea. That ultimate trust is in something, an entity, that's not defined by mortal subjectivity and all the interests that can bias and prejudice us. And that's why it's the ultimate source of trust. But by extension, when a human being behaves in a godly way, in a divine way, and we'll discuss that shortly, that trust can be extended also to a human. So what I'm saying is, it is true. Just as everything mortal is subject to the elements, to aging, to deteriorating, to eroding and perishing, so too is our interactions with each other. Everything is conditional, as we see. However, if we introduce something that is beyond human, that's not mortal, the immortal, the eternal, eternity in the palm of your hand, a connection to something that's infinite, otherwise known by some as God, and I don't really care about the word per se, as I've always quoted Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditchever, the great 18th century Hasidic master who told a self-proclaimed atheist, he said to him, the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. So the word is just a word. But if God personifies and embodies the concept of that which is beyond the mortal, the transcendent, and that's unshakable and eternal, and that's something that gives us those inalienable rights, that's something you can absolutely trust. So if a human being can bring into their lives divine values, eternal values, that in turn will create a love that is absolutely trustworthy. Now there are people and parents, despite maybe numbers-wise it may be a minority, but I'm not getting into the actual numbers. There's no question there are people that are totally trustworthy. Is it due to their wiring? Is it due to their own humility? So again, whatever word you want to use, I call that divine. Just as they say, to err is human, to forgive is divine. Or the line, to love another is to see the face of God. Most of us can identify with that. It's not a religious statement. It's a statement stating that there are two choices in life, and there are two options. There's connecting to the mortal, to instant gratification, to things that are subject to change, and there's connecting to things that do not change. Values that are deeper, like a foundation of a building. You don't want it to know that it's shifting, that it's changing. You want it to be solid, the roots of a tree. The tree itself you want to grow, you want it to branch out, to spread its wings. But foundations are what's critical for a person to really be the best they can be. You need to have something that you absolutely connect with and absolutely trust. Lately, there's been a lot of talk about attachment. Healthy attachment versus unhealthy attachment. Attachment disorders. We all need attachment. We all need connection. 9 months we spend in our mother's womb, completely connected, completely attached. Something you can totally trust. No one has to plan it. No one has to supervise it. No one has to oversee it. It's a natural biological process, yes, that the divine, or whatever word you want to use, has implanted in existence, that a mother will carry a child, will feed the child whether she wants to or not. The child will be sustained and grow during those months. Something completely trustworthy. You want that to continue after the child emerges and you cut the umbilical cord. But those 9 months, so all of life begins with a very healthy attachment. When we don't have healthy attachment, which is just really another way of saying connection, also trust begins to be compromised. Trust is directly built to healthy attachments. So it's fundamental, even more important than oxygen itself, or equally important if you like. And that's why it affects everything later. When you have that, that changes how you relate to others, allows you to celebrate vulnerability, to be with another completely trustworthy, where you don't have to constantly be second guessing or checking or looking over your shoulder. What would make a human being be that trustworthy? So as I said, some people have it naturally, but I would call that divine, because they have a divine dimension. Maybe they have it from birth. Everyone has it from birth, actually, I should say. But I mean from birth, that they grew up in a home that cultivated that nurtured that element. But what you're nurturing is the divine aspect within us that is unwavering, that can be totally trusted, that is not unpredictable, that is not shifting or ambiguous, or all the other words you use for things that we can't predict, things that are uncertainties in life. Those are very disruptive. I mentioned earlier, children thrive on consistency. They thrive on knowing, I know where my love is coming from. And when that's confused, it messes up everything. But the key point to remember is that trust is coming because we do have a divine element. So when you look at the currency of this country, in God we trust, let's think about that. What it means is not just some God somewhere in the sky, sitting on some throne in heaven, waiting to reward or punish us. It means that there is part of existence, I would say within existence, at the very core, there's a foundation, a bedrock, that's unchangeable, that's unwavering. As the prophet says, I, God, do not change. And therefore, when you connect to me, you know you can totally trust it. You don't have to every day check, is the person still trustworthy? And when we can channel that divine into us, we become trustworthy. Healthy parents are doing exactly that. Healthy friends are doing that. Healthy colleagues, a healthy spouse. That's the way we do it. So whether those that establish the words in God we trust knew all of this or not, but there's some depth that perhaps channeled through them, because it's a reminder. And of all places, money, the epitome of ego, of arrogance, of selfishness, of greed. Money, materialism, which separates so much. Look at what money does, even to loving families. There to write in God we trust, I think is quite fascinating, ironic. To realize that the money itself is telling you, do not trust anything. Not the money, not the people who make the money, not people who give you the money, not people who've helped you earn it. Trust something that is beyond all of that. So how do we connect to that? So I reintroduce another word, a word that I've many times I've repeated. It's a Hebrew word in the Hasidic terminology. It's called bittul, B-I-T-T-U-L. It's a combination of humility, modesty. I like to define it as suspending yourself in the face of something greater than yourself. It's a form of dedication, commitment. When you commit to something absolutely that you're ready to fight for, with every part of yourself, that's connecting to something that is eternal, that is trustworthy, absolutely trustworthy. So that's the way when we identify. Sit down and make a list. What are the things you're absolutely certain of in life? What are you absolutely certain of? You'll find it's not that many things. We don't know how long we're going to live. We don't know what our health will be like. We can't predict the future. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. We can assume that if things continue the way they are, you can more or less predict some things. But all that is part of an unknown. So it's a good exercise. What is it that you can absolutely trust? And if you can't answer that question, then you will not have total trust in your life. Then of course you're not going to trust even people that you love. You'll trust them, but to a certain point. It's vital to have in our lives that eternal foundation, that absolute conviction that this is something you can turn to. Because that allows us then to build within ourselves a conviction that gives us self-confidence and self-esteem and the ability to make choices that we're not always asking. Now, I know many people make choices all the time, even though they may not trust anybody. We make choices because you take risks for the different benefits that may come from that risk. But when you look at people who are paralyzed and can't make choices, then you see how trust plays such a key role. Those that do make choices, doesn't always mean they have absolute trust, but they do have some trust in their intuition and their instincts. Or they know they have to make a move. Are you going to buy this company or you're not going to buy this company? Are you going to invest or you're not going to invest? Are you going to divest or not divest? Are you going to fold or hold? And so on. But when you introduce that transcendent element that you can trust your own soul, and that's where you learn to trust yourself. You can't trust things that are basically subject to change. You have to trust things that are absolutely that are there. When you learn to connect to that, that spills over and creates certain type of certainty. You know, I must do this. This doesn't mean there's no room for flexibility and for negotiation and for yielding and compromise. But certain foundations you never compromise. The people who can compromise the very foundations of what you love can hurt someone that they love under the right duress, or right, I don't like the word right, under enough pressure and duress and challenge, that means there's something lacking. So what I would like to submit is that we all must identify that certain place deep in the center of your heart and soul. And call it whatever name you like. That's the thing we need to establish trust in. Everything else grows from there. And it can never be something that is constantly changing. Because if it's constantly changing, then how could you trust it? Every day it's in another place, it's another location, it's in another situation. As going back to foundations, to roots. They need to be there that you know you can completely rely on them even when you're not looking. You know the feeling when you have people working for you and you know you can totally rely, you can go to sleep and know this person is going to get the job done. And the feeling, of course, of unease when you know the person is erratic. Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. If they never do it, that's also clarity. And maybe it's time to get rid of that person. I say get rid, I mean fire that person, or at least not in the position that you're dependent on them. So the key thing is always to remember is to find something that you know you absolutely can rest assured it's going to get done. Just to use that simple example. Children need this more than anyone because of their impressionable nature, but all of us need it in our lives. So to go back to the initial question, whom do you trust? Whatever that answer may be, it's time to learn to find someone you can trust. Now you say, can I just trust someone overnight? No. Obviously, we will test and we will measure and we will see. But it's time to open that up, that possibility, because it can change your life. It will change your life in every possible way. An important thing with trust is also to remember that trust is not built on perfection. If you expect another person to be perfect, then I'll trust them. Trust is built on accountability. That even if they're not perfect, they'll be honest, they'll be transparent, they'll be sincere. They'll say, I made a mistake and I want to apologize. And you see they don't repeat it. Accountability. So it's not about fantasy. A lot of people have been hurt. They want perfection. That's the only thing that will satisfy them, because they want to compensate for all that unpredictability or for all that uncertainty, for all those disruptions. But you're looking for accountability, not perfection. You're looking for that honesty. And you find that many times in people who are in healing and recovery, who are dealing with these challenges and have been hurt. They understand the value and the importance of it. Many of us who are blessed to have more consistency in our lives sometimes take that for granted. But it's a critical thing to know you can rely on this. I'll just share a story that recently happened. I've been giving this class, this Wednesday night class, that's for over 40 years. Began in believe it or not, 1981. It's over 40 years, 42 years. I made a commitment, as I do with all good things is to never stop. Doesn't matter how I feel, under the weather, over the weather. It's raining, it's snowing. I remember even after 9/11, there was no way to get to the city. My class was in the city. The bridges were all closed. And I knew I'm getting to the class no matter what. I figured out a way. I don't know if I was going to swim over the East River, but I found all the roads were empty and ended up going through the Midtown Tunnel, was open. So I had to go through Queens. It was a whole roundabout way. It was actually fast because there was no traffic. I come to the class, it was on the Upper West Side. Hundreds of people were there. Hundreds. I usually had 150, 80. There was a need. There was a collective vulnerability that we all felt. In COVID, it was far more. And I was right, and I came. And I've been giving this class, and we went online, but I've never stopped. A while back, and this is more than once, it's happened more than once, but one specific thing jumps out at me. A person I know for many years who I met in the class maybe 1984, 85. They would come for a few years, then I didn't see that person for a while. Then years later, I met the person again. I keep meeting people that I knew from back 30, 40 years ago. This person told me I went through such difficult life. I went through a divorce, an ugly divorce. First, we were deeply in love. I knew who it was because they both had come to my class early years. Estranged from my children. Then someone in my family got, unfortunately, cancer. But I have to tell you one thing that in a way saved my life. I always knew Wednesday, you have a class. I can't say I listened every week, but I knew you were there. And times I would just turn on online and I'd say, yeah, there he is. Just to know there's something in all my upheaval, in all my uncertainties and insecurities, there's one thing, a shining light that continues. I can't tell you how it made me feel. It wasn't a feeling of arrogance. It was a feeling of tremendous humility, actually. I realized the importance in this impermanent world to introduce permanent fixtures, permanent foundations, things that people can rely on entirely. Be that person for someone else and find someone who can be that for you. Absolute trust. Is it easy to find? I'm not saying, but start looking and start with yourself. There's a part of you that you may not be able to trust because you've seen yourself be fickle. You've seen yourself also be unpredictable. You may have committed to things and then a few days later broke your own commitments to yourself. You may have betrayed yourself. But dig deeper and you'll find somewhere there a soul. That soul that is unwavering. In the morning, every morning, say thank you for returning my soul to me. It's also gratitude to in God we trust. We don't use the word God, but we're trusting. And actually it says, thank you for returning my soul and having absolute trust in me. So it goes both ways. Someone has total trust in you, that you have given life and your contract has been renewed because the transcendent divine trusts that you will fulfill your unique and indispensable mission. Indispensable, again. Another word that's unwavering, that's trustworthy. Say that every morning with intention. And then find things during the day to do that you know are eternal. I'm not talking about just having a coffee and eating lunch. Those are the temporary things. They're necessary, but they're temporary. Do something, an act of kindness, a beautiful word, a message, a text that makes somebody smile. A smile is eternal. It may not smile forever, but the impact is eternal. You never know. Commit yourself to doing eternal things, things that are trustworthy in other people's eyes. And in turn, look of what can give you something you can trust in. It can be actions as well, that you trust your commitment. Every day you must do something kind. You can trust that. So that list that I mentioned before of things that you find absolutely certain, make sure it starts growing. Doesn't have to be many things. Find 1, 2, 3 things a day. I speak often about a spiritual spa. Immerse your soul in a spiritual spa. Spa is an acronym for study, prayer, action. Cognitive, emotional, and behavioral conditioning. Study something spiritual. Listen to a song or a prayer or say a prayer that's emotional, emotionally uplifting. Do an act of kindness, behavior. Every day consistently, that consistency you can start trusting. Be a trustworthy person, and that too will draw trustworthy people into your life. And in God we trust reminds us of all of this. It's not just that in God we trust. And it's interesting, trust is not just faith, not just in God we believe, we trust. I trust you that you will be there for me. I don't just believe that you exist in a passive way. I believe that, and I connect, that you will be there for me. And that trust translates and channels from the divine into each one of us. So this is a tremendous opportunity to ask yourself, if you don't trust, what can I do to bring trust into my life? And it will spill over and affect every decision you make, especially the most important ones. Thank you so much. This has been Simon Jacobson, Meaningful Life Center, meaningfullife.com. Please subscribe to our growing YouTube channel. Subscribe to our weekly offerings. Please share this with others. And I'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your comments, your questions, suggestions, critique. Be blessed, be trustworthy, and find trustworthy people in your life. Trust. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Meaningful Life Center. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at meaningfullife.com/donate.